What's going on, builders? Welcome to Software Sundays. I'm your host, KD, and in this series, we have high level conversations about technology and the impact that it has in our community. I want to make sure that you have the resources that you need in order to grow your income, become an owner, and help shape what happens next in the digital world. Let's get into it. So, first up for the news for this week, I'm going to talk about the fact that more than 270 companies have signed an open letter asking and requesting the government to push for open weights and American AI leadership. So this letter is really a call to action for the industry and the government to really just push the fact that no one organization, no one company should be in charge of having the most advanced weights available or advanced AI available. So the push is really to say everyone should be focused not on building frontier models that are all held in some type of closed source uh, scheme, but making sure everything is open source, open weights, so that the public can actually benefit more from the AI. Or at least that's the argument. But one thing to really just define when we're talking about the argument for open weights versus closed weights is what does that even mean? So one of the connections that the authors of this letter made was the fact that open source software has been trending towards more openness and ex- more publicly available, being more publicly available in the recent years. And that's everything from programming languages like Java, Python, Golang, and these other programming languages to technologies like Kubernetes and other technologies that, like, most of the internet is kind of built on, especially some of the more advanced technologies and companies that you think about today. A lot of their software and the technology that they use is based on open standards and open source software. So that's where the idea behind going for open weights or open weights being beneficial for the public, that's kind of where it came from. The difference for LLMs and AI is the fact that open sourcing the code or even the training data is different than open sourcing the weights. The weights themselves are the actual toggles that you give to the engine, that AI engine, to actually decide and infer on new information what the output should be. So those weights being open is where most open models are. That's what they're talking about. So your deep seats, your llamas, your gemmas, they're open weights, but the source code for them, the training data behind them, those may not be open in the same definition and in the same way. But again, the argument is that if you make the weights open and you allow everyone to have access to that technology without having to go through proprietary boundaries, without having to pay one person, a company like Anthropic or OpenAI, without having to pay them a bunch of money just to access that frontier model, it would allegedly make it easier for other companies to benefit from some of the investment that has been put and placed into AI. So one of the things I thought about is the fact that it's very unlikely for the government to be able to tell a private company that they need to expose their source code or that they need to kind of give up their intellectual property. I doubt that's going to happen. They could put boundaries in place on the providers of these closed source models, and they can like regulate them to in a way that would almost make it easier for them to open source their models, but they can't actually just take the source code and put it on the internet. Or at least they would definitely get sued for that. There's gonna be some issues if that were to happen. But whether or not that happens, the question that I want to ask builders and I want you builders to think about is the is if you were given the most advanced model possible, what would you do with it? Would you know how to deploy it? Would you know how to host it? Would you know how to evaluate its effectiveness? Right? Could you make sure that the use case that you need that model to work for is actually best suited to the model that you chose? Could you make sure that the way you deployed that model is in line with the reliability requirements, the security requirements, and the availability requirements that that use case demands? That's the type of conversation that you have to have when we're thinking about going from consuming models via API to potentially hosting the models that your business relies on. So it gets very similar to if you were to think about Kubernetes and if you were asked whether or not you had Kubernetes experience. Experience in Kubernetes is not just saying I've deployed applications to a cluster, especially if that cluster or the deployment to that cluster was pretty much maintained through some CI/CD pipeline that you inherited. So you never had to really do much with it. The question would be like, have you ever started a cluster yourself? Have you gone from 0 to 1 to get a cluster? Have you gone through the growing pains of securing that cluster, locking it down according to some standards or some framework for securing a technology or a asset like the one you're looking to host? That's the type of question we have to think about when we're thinking about whether or not a model will be open or not. Because if they do become more open, if we do start seeing the capabilities of frontier models being at least nearly met by some of these open source models, which were pretty much there, I expect the gap between them to continue to close over time. But when we get to the point where it's like you really could choose one or the other and really have a good day either way, then you got to understand when is it even necessary to host the model yourself, right? It's some APIs are available publicly already. There's open source versions of almost every software your enterprise may need or your business may need. But the question is, do you have the resources, the talent, the time to even care about whether or not you should open or you should use and self-host that open version? That's something to think about from a builder perspective when you're talking to your clients about whether or not they need the their own self-hosted models. But it's also something to think about when you're working in a larger enterprise and the build versus buy argument comes about for AI and whether or not you need to do it. Then if you really want to go in any deeper into that conversation, you can join Build, Learn, Impact University. Every week, we're having high level conversations about technology. We're talking and building hands on. We're not just answering questions live that you may have. We're also making sure that you have real world experience building some of the tools and some of the projects that I discussed and that are being used in businesses every day. So if you want to join, click the link in the description or in the comments. You'll see it, and let's go build together. So we're gonna jump into the Q&A for this week. So first, what should great documentation include? So this is a great question. Thank you to the community for asking it. And really, I'll say the great documentation for software needs to include everything that the person who inherits that project is going to need. So they're going to need instructions on how to use it, right? Very basic. How do I start this thing? How do I set it up from the first run? Are there any prerequisites that are required? Are there any uh, data sources that I need to have on hand before this thing runs in that environment that I deploy it to? They need to know what the output is expected to look like from a logging perspective, but also to a actual outcome perspective. Like what data is generated, what events happen based on this software running. If they're able to see what the output should look like, then if there's any type of error or issue where it doesn't actually align with that expected output, then hey, we have to go check this out. Maybe I need to run it, rerun it. Maybe we need to reevaluate the input data that we gave it or something. We need to make sure that we are seeing the output that we expect. A lot of times that may mean checking that your environment is the same as the expected environment that you were deploying, that you were supposed to deploy into. And so sometimes that could be a demo, or that output could be a demo where you have a video saying, hey, this is what that workflow is going to go through whenever you run this application. Sometimes that may not be the best example, or that may not be the best way to do it, because maybe a lot of your flow is going to happen asynchronously, or it's going to happen without any clear output, right? It may not be clear what data is generated. It may not be super easy to tell that something's happening, even though it's happening because it's happening in the background, right? So that may be, in those cases, it may be better to just say, hey, this is what your file system should look like after it runs. This is what the data should look like after it runs. These are the columns we expect, or this is the size of the file we're expecting. Or even if the like in some of my workflows where I'll generate timestamps inside of the files that are created, so that you know that hey, this ran at least or got to this point, and at least someone inheriting that flow will be able to say, oh, okay, we got here, but there's something wrong in the file because it's not the right size that we expected, and that's why the next steps failed or something like that. So you have to have some way of explaining that to the person that's going to take it. Hey, this is what should happen, and if this doesn't happen, hey, we need to go back to the drawing board or something. Next question is, how do I keep track of my changes to automations and code over time? So the easiest answer is to get very used to using a version control system. That could be GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, some other process, but you have to understand and be creating repos to track your projects. How you size those projects really depends on your preference, right? You could size things very small. So some of my repos are really tiny. I may have one very specific flow in there, and that flow may be to do some very simple process, but it's easier for me to keep track of that because I don't have thousands of those very little processes, right? If you're getting into hundreds or like high hundreds or even thousands of repos that you're managing, then it may be easier to maybe group them by environment or group them by something other than, oh, this very simple workflow. So that's something to keep in mind. But you want to make sure you're tracking those changes inside of some repository, because there may be a scenario where you have to recreate your account, or you have to recreate all of the assets that you created in this one account inside of some other account, either because you're expanding your team, you're going into a new region, or whatever it may be. You don't want to be having a bunch of configurations that are always done manually, that you have to go into a dashboard to actually create and build. You should have some way to get back to the current state that you're in without having to recreate the wheel for yourself and your team. Because it could have taken you weeks sometimes to actually get to the current version of a workflow or the current version of some type of automation or project. If you don't have a way of getting back there, let's say something like your your entire environment disappears. It gets deleted and accidentally someone goes in there from your team and makes a change that they shouldn't have made. Or even, let's say you made a change that was requested, but you find out a few days later that that change is no longer necessary. It, you have to have a way to get back to that last working version. If you don't have that way, if you don't have that version, that instance of that state tracked in some type of version control source system, then it's going to be a very bad day for you and your team to actually get back to that when you need to. And let's avoid getting there. And some of the things that could actually benefit from version control, you can use that with a Power BI report, right? You can actually track the files, but also the report inside of Git. Now, the files themselves may not, well, I'll say the binary files for the report as one thing, those are not tracked like line by line, whereas there are uh, pbib files. I can't remember the exact type of file. There are like text-based files that you can use to track line by line changes to your Power BI, but you can also do that for UiPath if you're building an automation that way, and especially any type of code like hands-on code platforms. If you're using Python, Java, Flutter, whatever the languages that you use, and you and your team end up using JavaScript, those can actually those benefit the most from version control because you can tell line by line what changed over time. Certain things like I said, like Power BI, it may be more difficult to tell line by line what happened as things change over time. But whenever possible, try to have some type of tracking in place. It'll save you and your team a bunch of time and energy. Why is logging important? So Logging is very important for you as the operator of some software and even the consumer of that software that you create, both from a reliability perspective, but also from an audit perspective. When you're adding logs to your software and to the automations that you create, you're basically giving everyone a way to see into that flow. A lot of the flows that we build are going to be autonomous. They're not going to require us to watch them the entire time they're running. But you want to make sure that as that software, as that automation is running, that you have a way of keeping track of how far it got along and any of the things that it's doing. Now, I like to include logs before every phase, right? If we're thinking about a automation as a series of steps to get you from one phase or one state to another, I build logs or I add logs into every gap into that phase because I want to know, hey, did we get to this part yet? Did we get to this part? If we got to this part but we didn't get to this next part, then I know I need if an error occurs, I know something either occurred here, right, where the data was either messed up, something didn't go as planned, or maybe I just need to restart it. Maybe it was some type of temporary issue that if I just restart it from this point, it'll work. Now, if you don't have those types of logs in place, one, you won't know where exactly it broke. So troubleshooting and debugging becomes a nightmare. Like you're gonna have to actually watch it go through again. So that may be time consuming for you. And or you may have to go through blindly through your data files to see, hey, what's not the way it needs to be, versus pointing to a specific section inside of your process and saying, oh, something here is the issue, and then only having to dig in there. But the other issue is if you don't have any logging, is you might have to run that entire process over from start to finish, just because you don't know where it broke at. And some workflows actually cannot be restarted, or they should not be restarted, especially we're thinking like transactions that are only designed to happen once, or things that are only designed to come from an external source where you don't have control of that external source, so you may not have a way of actually triggering it from the very start. So though in those scenarios you want to make very sure that you have a way of knowing when and where your automation and integrations are failing and breaking. And it's also very helpful to log any type of dynamic information that's generated. Like, let's say you have an automation that is searching for a particular file or searching for some data, and that data may look different throughout different runs. It's helpful to log exactly where that or what data was found for this specific occurrence, because that may help with your troubleshooting later. You may have found that, hey, it found the wrong file or the wrong folder, and then that's why it broke later on. Or you may find that there's something missing. If couldn't find the file, then all right, that's the issue. It's looking at something from yesterday, but where with that data exists today, so something is wrong right now. So that's really helpful to just have that information available. And then when thinking about logging for certain systems, very important to log context. So logging in a multi-instance environment, right? Where you'll have an application that's running in multiple threads. You should log the thread that it's running on. You should log the time that it started, time that it ended. You should log the machine that it's running on. Maybe it's not always going to run on the same machine. That may be useful information to have from a debugging and troubleshooting perspective. Logging who triggered it. If it's something that is uh, something that you want to know kind of who did it, right? Who done it. It's very important to log that information if it's needed. So having those logs are helpful. Putting them somewhere where they can last between runs, right? So don't log to a file that only exists right now, or that's temporary. You want to log files or log data somewhere where it's going to last, even if this machine turns off, even if there's some real catastrophic failure in the middle of the run. It's like a black box. You have to be able to pick up that box later, pick up those logs later, and actually determine what happened. If your logs are only good for this run, then they're not good in the event of a real emergency. So think about that when you're designing your logging strategy and make them clear, descriptive, whenever possible. When should you use AI versus traditional software? So I think this is really important when we start looking at token maxing, quote unquote, and what that means for teams, what that means for your budget, and just how do we move with AI in an intelligent fashion. So, AI is a great tool. LLMs are very helpful. Machine learning is super cool and it can get you very far. But there are scenarios, there are use cases where you don't really need AI, where it's not going to provide any benefit over traditional rule based software. And it may actually harm you more, especially if you're looking for a deterministic output or you're looking for a lower cost. Sometimes traditional software is much cheaper to run than AI. So keep that in mind. But in a scenario where AI is probably better would be if the rules that you would use in traditional software, those rules would take too long to actually define, right? Let's say you're building a analyzer that is supposed to determine whether or not this customer's message is angry or they're frustrated or whatever it may be. If you were to define that using a simple if or rule to match the text to certain keywords, that's more difficult to actually define over every possible combination that could come in, every possible combination of input that your tool could get. Because in human language, there's a lot of different ways to express frustration and anger. AI is more suited to that use case because it can learn over time how to determine what's anger versus some other emotional, other characteristic that it's looking at. AI is also great for summarizing large amounts of data, at least from a early standpoint, right? It still may require a expert to go back in and really validate that the analysis that AI is giving is accurate, but it may take you farther than you would have gotten with your own eyes out the gate. So that could be a great use case. And so AI is great for very specific scenarios because it can get you farther faster than you could trying to do it through a traditional uh, flow. But traditional software is very helpful for reasons like I mentioned before. If you need a deterministic output, if you know the exact if this then that you're looking for any particular scenario, like if the person's age is over this, then we do this. You don't need AI to do that. It's going to cost you more in tokens to even come up with that answer than it is to get AI or get a normal rule based software application to do that. Also, think about the case where you're asking AI to do something that I would say you're asking AI to do something in a domain that it's not supposed to be trusted in. And I remember working on a project inside of a energy company, and we were building a chatbot for customer service, and that chatbot was supposed to not ever give a response in the event of a like fire or police related situation. It was always supposed to return a specific response. And so in that scenario, you should have some guardrails inside of your AI to know, okay, this is the scenario that we need to turn over to this canned templated response. But then you may have other rules inside of your inference engine or your API, however you're building your architecture, that if you see a keyword like this, you need to automatically send this uh, response, and that may save you some cost. It may save you some time, and it just gets you what you need faster because you know exactly what is supposed to happen here. Versus AI is one of those tools that allows you to, make a decision based on a scenario that you haven't thought about. You don't know what to do when we're here, but you want the AI to figure it out because you've given it examples on how to make that decision. But now one of the things to think about with AI and traditional software is that you need to put them together. when we think about the tools or giving AI skills, those skills should often be or tools should be a specific command that they're able to run. And that command may be able to do something that you need a deterministic output from. And you have a deterministic input, right? You have to start it with this data, or it has access to this data when it runs, and when it outputs a very specific answer that you can give back to some type of AI. So that's a way to use them in combination. Like you give the AI the ability to push and use the tools that are deterministic, but because that AI is non-deterministic, because it is flexible and dynamic, it can do more with those tools than a human could do as quickly. So it's almost like giving you an extra bit of speed that you may not have had without the AI. And it can give that amount of reasoning when you're not even around, right? When you're asleep, when you are in a meeting, when you're doing something else that required the focus of your specialist in that scenario, or that in that moment. What does a certification signal to potential teams that you'll work on? So a certification, I think I've mentioned it before, is not an end all be all to say that you know how to do something, or that you are necessarily an expert in doing everything that that certification is meant to kind of highlight or meant to test for. The certification is honestly like an entry level requirement in many roles. That's the way I think about it. Even if it's not an entry level certification, it's something that is supposed to highlight that you have at least thought about the intricacies of that topic, whether it's the CISSP and cybersecurity. That's not saying that you are an expert in every domain that is covered by the CISSP. It's saying that you have at least studied or have gotten some type of experience, or you have at least read about some of these domains, and that you understand maybe not how to do everything, but you know enough to either bring in the right person or enough to ask the right questions if you were to be in that type of scenario. For something like the solutions architect or solution certified solutions architect professional certification from AWS, or some of these other architect certs from other CSPs. It's not asking that you know every tool that they have. It's asking whether or not you've even thought about some of the different tools that they have available. Have you ever thought about some of the edge cases that matter when we're building with these tools? Like, have you considered cost? Have you considered uptime and reliability? Have you considered the multi account strategy or multi region strategy for deploying some type of application based on very specific business requirements? That's really what it's asking. It's not asking that, or it's not expecting you to know everything. And so that certification is going to signal to someone that is looking at it or seeing that you have it, that hey, you've at least thought about it. You understand that we're not just doing the very high level, oh, turning on an EC2 instance. We're not doing the very high level of, looking at a vulnerability or managing or deploying software. You actually understand that, hey, this software needs to make sense for the business. And the business doesn't just care about it working. The business cares about it not bankrupting the business, whether from a risk perspective or from an actual cost perspective. You're not just creating EC2 instances for no reason. You're not creating the largest, biggest EC2 instance that you could find just because you're going to run some very simple application on it, right? That we would need to make sure that you at least consider these things. That's what the certification is going to signal. And so it's something to shoot for if you are interested in that domain that it's covering, and it's worth getting if you have the experience in that domain. But it's not going to be the thing that proves to potential clients or employers that, or even team members, that you know everything about that domain. It's not meant to. And they're probably not even looking for someone that knows everything, right? They're looking for someone who knows enough to solve their problem right now. And that's what we have for the Q&A for this week. I did want to just give a quick mindset tip that I feel like would be helpful for a lot of our builders right now and into the future, is that you should be taking very big bets. And those bets should be often for yourself, or taking bets on yourself, So that could be investing in your education, that could be investing in your growth, right? To learn something or your ability to perform well in a domain or in some type of project. But you have to get beyond being afraid to lose on these bets, right? Every bet is not going to go in your favor. But the fact that you took a big bet on yourself, the fact that you invested in something, the fact that you took the time to say, hey, I'm going to do this, and you actually took a step forward to make it happen, is going to actually push you to actually win that bet. It's going to make it easier for the world to bend in your favor so that you actually do win that bet. But being too afraid to take the bet is always going to hold you back. If you're always thinking about what you can lose, you'll never get to the point where you're saying, "Yo, I could really win big." And if you're not excited about what you could win, if you're not thinking about the upside to that bet that you're taking, you're not gonna have the excitement required, the energy required to really go win like you need to in this world. So go take some bets, go make some big bets. Whatever you think is big right now, double that for your next bet and go prove to yourself that you could do it. But take that with a grain of salt, y'all. Don't bet your house if you don't need to, and don't gamble, right? If you could bet the house, but you're not gambling with these situations, right? You have to. When I say take a bet, make sure you understand the risk that you're taking and have some understanding about what it'll take for you to actually win, and not just saying, "Oh, I heard this was a good idea. Let me go invest or bet or gamble with my entire life savings on that one thing." Be intelligent. Think about it from a systems perspective. And that's what we have for today. I do want to share a few quick announcements. Happy birthday to my wife. It was her birthday a few days ago, and I just want to just shout her out here very briefly. Say that I love you, wife. I am happy that you are getting older and wiser and better every day. And I have fun with you on your birthday. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are feeling great for this new year. I hope you are looking forward to everything that is going to come forward in this next year. And I hope you're feeling healthy, happy, and just excited about your life and everything that you have brought into the lives of the people around you, and how much we benefit from your presence. So I love you. Hope you enjoyed your birthday. Continue to enjoy your birthday month because we ain't done yet. So and that's it for everybody. Peace out. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your week. Keep building, and I will see y'all on the next one. Let's get it.